As of January 2025, two major economic and diplomatic disputes have arisen between the United States and Japan, long-standing allies. These issues, the decline in Japan's holdings of US Treasury securities and the halted acquisition of US steel by Nippon Steel, underscore increasing strains in their economic ties. Japan's reduction in US Treasury holdings during 2024 signifies a strategic shift influenced by multiple economic factors. At the start of 2024, Japan held approximately $115 trillion in US Treasury securities, maintaining its status as the largest foreign holder of US debt. By September 2024, these holdings had decreased by 2.4% to around $123 trillion. This reduction aligns with Japan's efforts to stabilize the yen amid its depreciation against the US dollar. In April 2024, Japan conducted its largest ever single-day yen buying intervention, selling Y5.92 trillion, $4.83 billion to support its currency. Such interventions often involve selling US Treasury securities to fund the purchase of yen directly, impacting Japan's Treasury holdings. Concurrently, China has been decreasing its US Treasury holdings, continuing a trend observed since 2013. By October 2024, China's holdings fell to $796.1 billion, the lowest since February 2009. This reduction is part of China's strategy to diversify its foreign exchange reserves and mitigate risks associated with US assets. The simultaneous reduction by both Japan and China, the two largest foreign holders of US debt, reflects broader concerns about the stability and returns of US Treasury securities. Factors such as rising US fiscal deficits, potential interest, rate fluctuations, and geopolitical tensions contribute to these strategic adjustments. Additionally, both nations are seeking to diversify their foreign exchange reserves to enhance financial stability and reduce over-reliance on US assets. A major factor driving this shift is Japan's move away from its long-standing ultra-loose monetary policy. The Bank of Japan, BOJ, has introduced greater flexibility in yield curve control and begun transitioning toward higher interest rates. This policy shift has made Japanese government bonds, JGBs, increasingly appealing to domestic investors. For years, low yields on JGBs pushed Japanese investors, including key institutions like pension funds and insurance companies, to pursue higher returns abroad, particularly in US Treasuries. However, with JGBs now offering more competitive returns, assets are naturally being reallocated back to the domestic market. Another key factor driving Japan's decision is the volatility in currency markets. Throughout 2023 and early 2024, the Japanese yen experienced significant weakening against the US dollar. To stabilize the yen, Japan intervened in foreign exchange markets, selling US Treasuries to secure dollars for these interventions. These actions highlight Japan's dedication to preserving currency stability and bolstering its broader economic resilience amid global financial challenges. Japanese institutional investors are placing greater emphasis on diversifying their portfolios to manage risks more effectively. Heavy reliance on US debt exposes investors to vulnerabilities such as geopolitical tensions, interest rate volatility, and potential changes in US fiscal policy. Consequently, Japan is increasingly exploring opportunities in European and Asian markets, along with alternative asset classes such as infrastructure and technology investments. This diversification aligns with Japan's broader strategy of reducing dependence on a single economic partner. Implications for US and global economies. Japan's reduced appetite for US Treasuries could have significant repercussions for the US economy. As a major holder of US debt, any sell-off could lead to decreased demand, putting upward pressure on US borrowing costs. This is particularly concerning given the US government's growing fiscal deficits. Furthermore, large-scale Treasury sell-offs could increase market volatility, affecting global financial stability. The reduction also underscores the fragility of global reliance on US debt. As Japan realigns its economic strategy, other nations, may follow suit, leading to a gradual erosion of US Treasury status as a global safe haven asset. Broader strategic implications. Japan's actions are not purely economic. They are part of a broader strategic recalibration of its international relationships. The move to reduce US Treasury holdings reflects a desire to assert greater financial autonomy and reduce dependence on US monetary policy. This realignment aligns with Japan's broader efforts to strengthen ties with other key partners, including the European Union, ASEAN nations, and even China. Concurrently, Japan is engaging in diplomatic efforts to strengthen ties with China. In December 2024, Japanese Foreign Minister Takeshi Iwaya visited Beijing and, alongside Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi, participated in the second meet. Manufacturers proposed the acquisition, which was set to make Nippon Steel the second-largest steel producer globally, enhancing its production capacity and market reach. The deal included commitments to retain US Steel's name, maintain its Pittsburgh headquarters, and honor existing agreements with the United Steelworkers Union. However, in January 2025, President Joe Biden blocked the acquisition, citing national security concerns. The administration emphasized the importance of maintaining domestic control over critical industries like steel manufacturing, which are vital for national defense and infrastructure. This decision followed a review by the Committee on Foreign Investment in the United States, which assesses the national security implications of foreign investments. In response, both Nippon Steel and US Steel filed lawsuits against the Biden administration, alleging that the decision was politically motivated and lacked a rational legal basis. The companies argued that the bloc violated constitutional guarantees of due process and statutory procedural requirements. They also accused domestic competitors and labor unions of engaging in anti-competitive actions to prevent the acquisition. The Japanese government expressed difficulty understanding the decision, viewing it as a potential strain on economic relations between the two nations. Japan's industry minister described the move as incomprehensible, highlighting concerns about future investments and the implications for US-Japan economic ties. These developments highlight the complexities of US-Japan economic relations. Japan's reduction in US Treasury holdings reflects broader market and policy dynamics, while the blocked acquisition underscores the US government's emphasis on national security and foreign investments. Both situations warrant close monitoring, as they have significant implications for the economic and diplomatic ties between these long-standing allies. The US-Japan relationship over the years has been defined by periods of forced contact, cultural exchange, conflict, occupation, economic rivalry, and ultimately a deep strategic and economic partnership, spanning from the mid-19th century to the present day. This bilateral bond has profoundly shaped both nations' domestic trajectories and their roles in international affairs. Below is a chronological, cohesive examination of how US-Japan relations evolved, highlighting significant historical milestones, geopolitical dimensions, and contemporary collaborations, supported by relevant facts and figures. The modern bilateral relationship can be traced back to the arrival of Commodore Matthew C. Perry in 1853. At this time, Japan had been under a policy of almost complete isolation, known as Sakoku, for over 2 centuries. Perry's squadron of American warships sailed into Uraga Bay near Edo, present-day Tokyo, with the express intention of negotiating trade and diplomatic ties. The show of naval force had a profound impact on the Tokugawa shogunate, unsure of its capacity to repel Western advances and alarmed by what it perceived as a threat of further military coercion. The shogunate reluctantly agreed to open a limited number of ports to US vessels. This resulted in the Convention of Kanagawa in 1854, which became Japan's first modern treaty with a Western nation. Although modest in scope, the treaty spelled the beginning of the end for Japan's centuries-old isolation. American influence during this period was not limited to opening ports for commerce. Early cultural and technological exchanges, such as the introduction of steamships, modern armaments, and Western schools of military thought, laid the foundation for Japan's subsequent transformation. The Meiji Restoration of 1868, which dismantled the Tokugawa shogunate, and restored the emperor to a central political role, directly benefited from Western expertise. The United States was one of several Western powers that Japan looked to for guidance in matters of industrialization, education, and constitutional governance. Japan's modernization and growing frictions following the Meiji Restoration saw Japan embark on a period of rapid modernization and industrial expansion. American missionaries, engineers, and educators found ample opportunities in Japan, contributing to the establishment of new universities and technical institutes. At the same time, the US government regarded Japan as a significant market for industrial goods and raw materials. Despite this mutually beneficial exchange, tensions emerged as Japan sought to extend its influence throughout East Asia in a manner that sometimes clashed with American interests in the decades leading up to World War I. Japan's victory in the Russo-Japanese War of 1904 to 1905 signaled its arrival as a major power in the region. American observers alternately admired Japan's modernization and expansion, yet worried that Japan's assertive foreign policy might including embargoes on oil and steel. These sanctions put Japan's resource-dependent war effort in jeopardy and contributed to a spiral of mistrust. After failed negotiations, the relationship reached a nadir on December 7, 1941, with Japan's surprise attack on Pearl Harbor. This act led the United States to declare war on Japan, plunging the two nations into a bitter conflict. World War II in the Pacific ended following the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki in August 1945, an unprecedented devastation that reshaped global strategic thinking and significantly impacted the Japanese psyche. An estimated 140,000 people died in Hiroshima and 70,000 in Nagasaki by the end of 1945. The bombings also underscored the destructive potential of nuclear weaponry. Post-war occupation and reconstruction, Japan's surrender paved the way for a 7-year occupation under the leadership of General Douglas MacArthur, the Supreme Commander for the Allied Powers, SCAP. The occupation, effectively administered by the United States, brought sweeping reforms that permanently altered Japan's political, economic, and social institutions. Key elements of the occupation and reconstruction process included demilitarization. The Imperial Japanese Army and Navy were disbanded, and Japan adopted Article 9 in its new constitution, renouncing war as a sovereign right. Democratization. A new constitution was promulgated in 1947, modeled in part on Western liberal democracies. Parliamentary democracy took root, and universal suffrage empowered Japan's electorate. Economic and land reforms. Extensive land reforms broke up large estates to favor small-scale farmers, contributing to economic leveling. Industrial zaibatsu conglomerates were reorganized, and labor unions were legalized. By the end of the occupation in 1952, Japan had re-emerged as a largely democratic nation with a burgeoning manufacturing sector. Under the Treaty of San Francisco in 1951, Japan regained its sovereignty and joined the international community as a peace-oriented state, the US-Japan Security Alliance. In the early Cold War era, the United States viewed Japan as a critical ally in containing Soviet influence in Asia. In 1951, both countries signed the US-Japan Security Treaty, which formalized a defense arrangement, allowing US military forces to station in Japan, particularly on Okinawa and other bases throughout the country. This security pact became a linchpin of US strategy in East Asia and facilitated Japan's focus on economic development by reducing its need for a large standing military. During the 1950s and 1960s, Japan's economy grew at an unprecedented pace, with annual growth rates averaging around 10%. This period, often referred to as the Japanese post-war economic miracle, was driven by robust exports, government coordination, and a highly skilled workforce. American companies and consumers provided an enormous market for Japanese goods, fueling industries from automobiles to electronics. At the same time, US financial and technological support, along with preferential market access, helped cement Japan's status as an industrial powerhouse, trade frictions, and technological rivalry. By the 1970s and 1980s, Japan had become the world's second largest economy, trailing only the United States. However, this remarkable success also led to significant trade imbalances. Japanese car manufacturers, such as Toyota, Honda, and Nissan, swiftly gained market share in the United States, while American-produced goods found it challenging to penetrate Japanese markets. Bilateral trade conflicts in areas like automobiles, semiconductors, and consumer electronics became recurring flashpoints. The US trade deficit with Japan soared, prompting American policymakers to pressure Tokyo for market liberalization and currency re-evaluation. Notable agreements such as the 1985 Plaza Accord were intended to reduce trade imbalances by appreciating the value of the Japanese yen against the US dollar. Although this step helped shrink the trade gap in the short term, it also contributed to liquidity in Japan's financial system, feeding a speculative asset bubble. When Japan's economic bubble burst in the early 1990s, the country entered a prolonged period of stagnation known as the Lost Decade. Nevertheless, both nations maintained close diplomatic and security ties throughout this challenging economic period. Strategic partnership in the 21st century. Following the end of the Cold War and into the 21st century, US-Japan relations have become multifaceted, extending beyond economics and military arrangements. Shared values such as a commitment to democratic governance, rule of law, and open markets underpin the alliance. The two nations have collaborated on an array of global and regional issues, ranging from humanitarian relief operations to anti-piracy initiatives and efforts to denuclearize the Korean Peninsula. Several key developments underscore the modern partners'